inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
My guest on the podcast today has a really inspiring story. He got started really young. He was in his 20s when he bought his first rental property. But by the time he was 41, he had enough rental income that he had reached financial freedom. He was able to quit his job and retire off the monthly rental income. I think you're going to love this interview, so let's take a real quick break. We'll come back in 30 seconds, and we'll meet Fleming Schutrumpf from Denver.
Are you on track to achieve your financial goals? Income-producing real estate is the most historically proven way to accumulate wealth and has created more financial freedom than any other means. Norada Real Estate provides everything you need to invest in the best turnkey cash flow rental properties. Our simple, proven system will help you create real wealth and passive monthly income. Get your free strategy session with our knowledgeable investment counselors at noradarealestate.com. That's Norada realestate.com.
Hey, Fleming, why don't we start at the very beginning? How did you first get started in real estate?
I got started in real estate pretty early, and I think it came out of my early life experiences before I owned real estate, really seeing the value of being a real estate owner rather than just a person who's on real estate because of somebody else's permission. Mm-hmm. But I bought my first piece of land in the mountains in Colorado actually when I was 20. And then I built a house on it using my student loan funds while I was going to graduate school a few years later. And then I bought my first rental when I was 25. And actually when I was 25, I bought my first rental at condo, which worked out really well.
Okay.
And I liked it so much, I went out and bought a sixplex, which actually I kind of feel like I bit my teeth out on it. I didn't know enough and learned a lot of hard lessons. And I think people like you doing these really great podcasts help educate people to not repeat some of the mistakes I made back then.
Well, I appreciate, that's what we're here for, to help people. So why don't you tell us, so what did you learn? What went wrong with that deal?
So the big lesson for me is don't buy a rental property with a tenant in it. And this one, the sixplex, was owned by a hairdresser, and he had been extremely just blasé about letting anybody get into the property that had any kind of money to show him. Mm-hmm. And there's 3 of the 6 tenants somehow found a legal aid organization that provided free legal help to basically stiff the landlord.
Oh, no.
And so for about 6 months, all 3 of them weren't paying rent. And one of them, the ringleader, I had the sheriff there. I succeeded on my second attempt at evicting him. And I'll tell you about that. So the first attempt to evict him, I'm in the elevator with an attorney. He's like, I'm Phil Hopkins. I'm the leading evictions attorney in Denver. Here's my card. And I'm like, thank you. And I'm like, I don't need you. I can do this on my own. Mm-hmm. And then I'm in court, and the judge is, do you have permission from your LLC to represent the LLC in court today? And I'm like, no, but I am the LLC, so I have permission. He's like, nope, eviction denied, and just stamped denied. And then Phil Hopkins, the attorney I met in the elevator, is handing sheets of paper much less documented than my eviction case, and the judge is just rubber stamping it and just doing next, and he does about 50 evictions in less time than my one failed eviction.
I think that's a really good lesson. So what was the judge looking for from your LLC to show that you had permission?
He was like a statement of authority or something.
Okay.
And I think sometimes the legal system is set up that if you do pay a lawyer, basically the judge used to be a lawyer,
right?
Which eject you from the process.
Totally. So, all right. So what I'd like to do today is to kind of figure out how you got to where you are today. And why don't you just tell us real quick what your portfolio looks like today, and then we'll take a step back, and I want to kind of figure out how you did it.
Great. Yeah. So today I own 22 properties, and really my passion, I used to work in IT as a consultant, project manager, program manager. And so many IT projects, there's an 80% failure rate that projects either go over budget, they have less features than they promised, or that the software never actually goes live so that nobody ever gets to interact with the software. Mm-hmm. And so I like hanging doors or doing something tangible where that will be there for a long time. And so I got divorced about 4 years ago, and at that time I had 35 properties. And I basically worked my way up to 35 properties while working full-time as an IT management consultant, so working 50, 60-hour weeks, just because working that much gave me motivation to try and get out of the rat race. And I had learned as a project and program manager to get pretty good at delegating and kind of trusting people to do what I needed them to. And, sometimes delegating, people aren't perfect, and there's always the belief that we could do it better ourselves. But in the end, if I did it myself, I couldn't have gotten to 35 properties.
Right. So now working full time and having that many properties, was it adding a lot of hours to your day?
It's a great question because I think it did and it didn't. And so one of the things that happens with this kind of high overtime IT world is sometimes they expect you to work 80 hours a week, but then when it's an off week, when you're between clients, they still expect you to work 40, but they don't really have any work. Mm-hmm. So I would be at my desk crunching Excel spreadsheets, doing like my own stuff or like remodeling budgets or whatever. And people are like, Fleming is working really hard, where other fellow employees would just be more blatant about just not showing up or whatever.
Right.
I got a better reputation and I think had better career trajectory because of having that additional work to work on.
Okay. And then how did it come about that you went into this full time, that you didn't need your job? Did you just realize that you had enough passive income that you didn't need that job anymore?
That's a great question. And it should have worked out that way. And I really believe most of success is about psychology. And for me, I always had this mindset, okay, I'm 3 more properties away from being able to quit and mm-hmm. really live off my rental income. And then I would buy 1 more and I'd still feel like, that's 3 more. And so like I would have never gotten there myself. Ultimately, I had gone on vacation to Peru. First day back at work on January 6th, 2014, I'm told to be in the CEO's office in 5 minutes. And I'm like, that smells funny. And I go in and the CEO is looking sad and the CEO is telling me, Fleming, we need to lay you off. And there's kind of a story to it. I'm like, okay, tell me why. And they're like, we can't tell you. And I'm like, come on, we're all adults. I'm not going to sue you. Tell me. No, we're not going to tell you. I'm like, come on. And finally, he just blurts out, the COO says this, Fleming, you remind me of my ex-wife. We talk, but we don't communicate.
Oh, wow.
Wow. It's one of those where I really feel like I was liberated from the job. What had happened before that, leading up to it, is I realized that my personal net worth with my rental properties was higher than most of the founders of the small IT consulting firm. Mm-hmm. And what it made me, at the time I was director of sales, I wanted to pursue some initiatives that were maybe somewhat risky, but they were what the company said they wanted in terms of growth. And the COO especially was extremely risk averse. He would not take any risk. Like, I'm surprised he got dressed and crossed the street in the morning. But it's to be successful in real estate or in life in general, one has to take calculated risks. Not stupid risks, mm-hmm. but calculated risks.
Coming up on the Rental Income Podcast.
I want to get into some of the numbers that Fleming looks at when he's buying a property. I also want to ask him about the financing. We will cover that in just a second, but first it's time for a Landlord Pop Quiz brought to you by rentprep.com. Here's today's question. If you run a background check on an applicant, is it legal to deny that application with just a text or a phone call? The answer is actually no, and that's because of the Fair Credit Reporting Act that says that you must issue adverse action when you're denying an applicant based on information you found in their background report. So what you need to do is give them what's called an adverse action letter. But where do you get that? luckily, RentPrep has you covered. If you go to rentprep.com/Dan, they have a bunch of free resources just for our listeners. And one of the things that they'll give you is an application denial letter template. Totally free, no catch. Just go to rentprep.com/Dan. Again, that's rentprep.com/Dan. Now, you might be asking yourself, why are they giving this for free? What's the catch? Why would they be giving all these resources? Well, RentPrep just simply wants you to know who they are, and they want to start a relationship with you. Their main business is they are a tenant screening company, so they will do background checks on your applications. They'll run their credit. They'll check previous landlords. They'll give you all the information that you need to decide if this is a good person that you want to rent from you. And they just want you to know that they're there, and the next time you have a vacancy, just consider using them. And they are a really good company. They're the company that I recommend, and I think they do a really good job of screening tenants. So if you go to rentprep.com, that's rentprep.com/Dan, you can get the free resources. And I've also worked out with them for them to give you a 20% off promo code for your first tenant screening. So rentprep.com/Dan, of course, that's my name, rentprep.com/Dan. All right, let's get back to the interview. So Fleming, tell me, what are the numbers that you're looking at when you're considering buying a rental?
Yeah, so early on, I used to get wrapped around the axle and kind of just buried in analysis paralysis around spreadsheets. And there's lots of deal evaluation spreadsheets. And in the end, I realized the formula that I like is if the purchase price is at or below 100 times rent, it was a good deal.
Okay.
And in this market, it's really hard to find properties like that. And interest rates are ridiculously low. So, at 3.75% or 4.25% for an investment property, maybe I could pay 130 times monthly rent.
Okay. So that's basically, just so everyone understands, that's the 1% rule that's come up a lot on the show. So if a property is going to rent for $1,000 a month, then you want to pay $100,000 or sometimes $130,000 for that property. And so that was giving you good enough cash flow to pay for the debt service and any repairs that might come up, and then also give you some cash flow. Like that you found that number was a pretty good number to safely buy a property?
Yes and no. So that's my go, no-go number. So if it's above that ratio, it's basically like don't spend time on it because it's really not a good investment of time and not a good long-term hold. I really got super fortunate, and this goes back to your earlier question. So I bought like that sixplex that I bought, kind of bit my teeth out on in 2003. And then I really got burnt. I really didn't invest in properties for a while, but I found this book at a thrift store. It was written in 1963. It was something like How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. Mm-hmm. And even back then, Greenspan was already kind of a young rising star at the Fed, and this book really criticized some of his policies. And from 2003 to 2008 was a long time, but that book kind of gave me this idea that I needed to have a war chest. So I got some lines of credit so that I was poised when 2007, 2008 happened. I was ready. I had money to buy.
Oh, that's great. So that's when the market collapsed. That was the recession. And so houses were basically on sale back then. Now, looking back on that time, like today in 2017, that seems like a no-brainer to buy houses 10 years ago that was the bottom of the market. But going through that, was that scary? Because, I mean, you see prices are going down and you're seeing what looks like a good deal on a house, but that house could continue to go down in value. So was it scary to make that leap and actually buy something? Yes and no, because at the time I wasn't doing it for the money. I really feel like I love remodeling
properties. Like if I'm an artist, that's my art. Like finding budget ways to take a really rundown house and make it beautiful, where people who said 3 weeks ago that the house should be torn down are like now, wow, I'd like to live there. And I've done that over and over again. And so I was really doing it because I enjoyed it. And then I got kind of sucked into it out of a feeling of obligation. So I had this guy, David, who was my all-around handyman. He was an amazing painter, but also I did some drywall patching and some plumbing. And he helped me take this condemned 5-plex that I bought for $135,000. That's now worth about $600,000. And he helped me get that fixed up and then eventually uncondemned with the city. And so he had worked at some furniture factory, and he's like, I could go back to lacquering furniture, but I don't want to. And I'm like, I want to keep stable work going. So partially out of an obligation to him, I'd buy the next one and the next one and the next one until I ran out of money.
Okay. Now, how were you financing these properties? Were you going to community banks or were you going to the bigger banks?
So initially, all my loans were with kind of the big national banks, the Wells Fargo and Chases of the world. Okay. And then at some point, I had 9 mortgages, and they're like, no, you're outside of the limits for them reselling their loans to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac on the secondary market. And so I figured out here in Colorado, there's a wonderful bank called First Bank, and they were willing to do portfolio loans and a little tougher terms. So they required 35% down, and then they would do a finance the rest at investment property rates, so half a point or a point higher than what you would see in the newspaper as mortgage rates.
Okay. Now, what about setting money aside for repairs? You know, sometimes if someone's looking to buy their first property, they want to figure out, okay, I'm going to set aside a certain percentage of the rent every month to buy to take care of vacancy or any kind of maintenance issues that come up. With you having a larger portfolio, do you still have to analyze things that closely, or are you able to cover anything that might come up with the cash flow from all the rentals?
That's a great question. So when I buy a property, I usually like buying the really distressed properties that I can get at a much better value. And so I'll give you an example. In 2010, I bought a house, which also had a carriage house just next to the alley on the lot. I bought that for $42,000. I probably put maybe $20,000 in repairs in. So I'm into it for $62,000. And the rents I got at remodel were like $1,000 a month. Okay. Back then, and they've risen since then. So that's much better than the 1%.
Right.
But when I do that much of a remodel, so you're talking new roof, new water heater, new furnace, new plumbing, sometimes new wiring, new flooring, paint, carpet, whatever. There's not that much left that's going to break and fail in the middle of the night. So on that, the need to escrow is much lower. It's more when I buy something that's like in good enough condition that I feel like I don't have to do anything, but somebody sold it, so they also knew they were going to sell, so they may have deferred maintenance. Those are the kind of properties where there's more of a need to have an escrow. Okay.
So on those kind of properties, like, will you actually set aside money, or do you just know if something comes up, it's going to be a few $100, it's going to be no big deal?
You said that well, because if you go to the yellow pages and call a roofing company, they might tell you it's $12,000 for a roof. And the same with, I think sewer contractors are kind of one of the worst in the business for just quoting prices that have nothing to do with what they actually pay to get the work done. But if you find decent contractors, I have a wonderful roofer I've used since 2010, then the roof, a normal roof on a small 2-bedroom house is $3,500. Like, it's not going to kill anybody.
Right. So yeah, you really gotta know how to buy stuff, because you're right. Like, you can totally spend $12,000 if you don't know what you're doing. So, like, how do you find those connections for the the local contractors that are going to give you good prices for fixing stuff?
I wish there was a silver bullet. The way I've done it is through trial and error and having at times some really terrible contractors who really ripped me off. And then just trying again and getting the next guy. And if they're good, stick with them. And one way that I find to get my contractors to be super loyal to me is the day the work's done, I'll write them a check. And so, there's a lot of people who are like, at the end of the month, we do check processing. So stay tuned for a check. That's not a nice way to treat people.
Right.
Especially if they discount their services. And so that means they're living more hand to mouth. Pay them right away. That keeps them coming back.
That's awesome. Well, Fleming, you have a great story. I really appreciate you telling your story. Now, if someone wants to learn more, you have actually written a book. Why don't you tell us about your book and where people can find out more about you?
Yes, thank you. So I actually just published the book, Buy Your First Investment Property Fast, and it's on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and search for my name, which is really hard to spell, it's Schutrumpf, S-C-H-U, Trump, like the president, and the last letter F. You can find my book. And what I did there, I think a lot of books on real estate are somewhat textbooks. So they're dry. They give you the information in a way that's so boring that it's impossible to kind of wade through it. And so in this book, I really put lots of personal stories and war stories and all the scars I have from like that sixplex or whatever, sharing my mistakes with you as the listener here so that you get to learn from my mistakes rather than repeating your own version of that.
If you want to find the link to Fleming's book, I'll go ahead and put it on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 135. And I'll also go ahead and add that to our reading list of all the books that we've mentioned on the podcast. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/books. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with a new episode next Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.